So in this video, I'm going to show you 5 fun and powerful builds that you can use on your playthrough in Shadow of the Erdtree, and once you get back to the normal game, these weapons are absolutely going to crush. So with that being said, let's look at what we're dealing with. So first on the list, we're going to have our Greatsword of Solitude build. I'm always a huge sucker for a strength build, and this weapon has fantastic strength scaling with an A scaling in strength, and also is going to have some really good physical damage. However, one thing I really enjoy about this weapon is the fact that this Greatsword has a awesome movement with it that allows you to dart across towards your enemy after doing a almost vacuum slice Ash of War into them and doing an incredible amount of damage. The Solitary Moon Slash is a really awesome Ash of War, and on top of this weapon having great damage, that is also going to add to your mobility and your ability to whittle down bosses really fast. If you're going to be one thing, you better be efficient, and this build definitely gets it done. You also have some really good stagger potential with this being a Greatsword and using heavy charged R2s, which we are going to implement into this build as well. Overall, I think this build is really great. It's a lot of fun to use and provides a different aspect of playing a Greatsword that we haven't had in the vanilla game. You are going to get this weapon in the Western Nameless Mausoleum the second you get into the DLC, so it is very easy in terms of geography to get, but once you get into that fight, it can be a little difficult. So for this build, we are going to be using the Greatsword of Solitude for our weapon. Your armor can be whatever you want to get you over 51 poise. I was using the Green Turtle Talisman, but you want to use the two-headed Green Turtle Talisman. I'm also using the Shard of Alexander, the Axe Talisman, and the Blade of Mercy for when we do get those criticals. For your flask, you're going to be using the Spike Cracked here and the Stonebarb Cracked here. And next up, we're using the Death Knight's Longhaft Axe. This weapon is incredible, and it does so much damage. You have a B scaling in strength, you also have a D scaling in faith, and you're going to do both physical and lightning damage. We're going to tap into that lightning damage like crazy, and we're going to be utilizing the Blink Bolt Longhaft Axe Ash of War, which is going to give you some fantastic mobility, followed by a massive lightning axe slam down on the ground, and then a lightning bolt is going to hit your target. So there's a lot of damage going on with this build, and it is a lot of fun to use. Now, our armor actually is going to matter for this build because we're using the entire Death Knight set to get a 2% increase for each armor piece that we're wearing to lightning incantations and skills. And although we are not using incantations for this particular build, we are going to be using lightning skills, aka the Ash of War, so this is going to add a nice 8% on top of that. Now in some of these clips you will see me using Howl of Shabriri, and I found overall with this particular build that Howl of Shabriri is not a good option. It's not that I don't like the extra damage, but with the Ash of War and with a Great Axe build in general, you are trading damage quite often, so Howl of Shabriri is going to make you take more damage, so I ended up taking that off. However, if you do want to have the Howl of Shabriri on your build, you can definitely do that. Just make sure you're avoiding certain attacks. Now for this build, we are going to be using the Death Knight's Longhaft Axe. We're also going to be using the entire Death Knight armor set, which is only going to give you 47 poise, but we do want that extra damage. So for your talismans, you are going to be using the Two-Handed Sword Talisman, the Lightning Scorpion Charm, the Axe Talisman, as well as the Shard of Alexander. Now for your flask, you're using the Lightning Shrouding Cracked here and the Spike Cracked here. And for your buffs, you're going to use Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow. All this is going to tie together to give you a really nice synergy in damage, and I think you're really going to enjoy this build. Now speaking of builds that are just incredibly fun, we are going to be using the Beast Claws. I fell in love with these weapons at the beginning of my DLC playthrough, and I used them for probably 3/4 of the way through. They do crazy damage, they attack super fast, so we're going to be making use of successive attack talismans and flasks, and this is just going to shred your enemies to pieces. We are going to be using a certain armor set that's going to boost your damage, and you are going to find this a really fulfilling and fun way to play. If you enjoy close combat and typically enjoy fist weapons, then this is going to take that and crank it up to 100. It is constant fun playing with these. You are constantly going to be killing enemies, and it's really fun to just shred bosses down with the Savage Claws Ash of War. Now, I personally landed on a bleed build with these. However, it is highly recommended that you try out different greases on these weapons. Blood builds are incredibly fun, but if you put frost on these or fire, you absolutely decimate everybody. I really enjoyed my time playing with these when they had frost grease on them, and I think I may do a frost build with them as well, but it was just a really fun time to experiment with the different aspects and different greases you could use to build up the different statuses on your enemies. Now, I mentioned the Ash of War Savage Claws earlier, and although that is the shining attribute of these weapons, it also is one of its biggest pitfalls. In my experience, I was never able to stop the combo halfway through, and I constantly was trading damage with people when I would misuse this Ash of War and misread the windows of opportunity. This weapon is definitely going to reward your skill being high, and will definitely really punish you if you're not used to the moveset. Now for this build, you're going to be using the Blood Beast Claw. I'm also using the Pelt of Ralva and the entire Rakshasa armor. Each piece of the armor gives you plus 2% increased damage, but it's also going to make you take a little bit more damage as well. So I am taking that and getting a 6% increased damage boost from just my armor, and I wanted to RP with the Beast with the Bear Helm. For my talismans, I'm using the Shard of Alexander, the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, the Crusade Insignia, as well as the Rottenwing Sword Insignia. If you want, you can replace this with Milson's Prosthesis, especially when fighting bosses, because the Crusade Insignia is only going to proc after defeating an enemy, and in a boss fight, you won't do that and it'll be too late. Next up, we have our Dragon Hunter's Great Katana build. I really enjoyed playing with this build, and the extra damage you're going to get to dragons from the Dragon Rune / Ash of War is almost comical because it's so much. This is also going to give you a really fantastic projectile to allow you to get some damage in as you're closing the distance. If you do hit the enemy with the sword and the Ash of War in one swipe, you're going to do extra damage as well, which is going to whittle your enemies down even faster. I've absolutely had a blast using this weapon, and not only does it look awesome, but it's going to do some decent damage as well. It's going to scale equally with strength and dexterity with a C in both, and we are going to be buffing the damage with Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow, as well as a few talismans that I'll get into in a minute. I wasn't 100% sure how I felt about the Great Katana moveset, but I actually grew to love it. It's a little bit slower, but it does pack a punch. Now, one of the really cool things about the Ash of War is not only do you get a projectile, or the fact that if you hit the enemy with both your projectile and physical sword at the same time, you're going to do more damage, but this skill is also chargeable, so we can boost that damage as well. You have the ability to jump up in the air and fire off a very quick slash, or you can hold your positioning in the air, charge up, and then let it rip. I found that in the gameplay there are different situations which require both options, so it's really nice that we have that ability. The only thing that I found that I absolutely cannot stand about this weapon is minor, and it's the fact that the sheath clips through the ground as I walk, and it just doesn't look cool. I know it's never going to happen, but if this was in the next patch and they made it not clip through the ground, that would be a 10 out of 10 situation. Now for the build, I'm using the Dragon Hunter's Great Katana. I'm also using whatever armor set gets you over that 51 poise mark. If you do want to get even more damage out of this, use the Rakshasa armor set, because that's going to give you 8% more physical damage. For talismans, I'm using the Shard of Alexander, the Two-Handed Sword Talisman, the Godfrey Icon, and the Axe Talisman. For my flask, I'm using the Dexterity Knot Crystal Tier as well as the Green Burst Crystal Tier, and for my buffs, I'm using Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow. And for our last build, we have the Milady Light Greatsword build. This weapon is a successive attack user's absolute dream. It is so fun to use. The moveset intertwines perfectly between light attacks and heavy attacks. The Ash of War that we have on this weapon is going to allow you to go into a stance that's going to cause two separate actions. The light attack is going to give you a flurry of very fast attacks, and the heavy attack is going to launch you into the air and slam you down onto the ground, causing a lot of damage. Wing Stance is super fun to use, and it is very punishing if you use it incorrectly. However, as I just stated, you get those two separate attack patterns, and it does make the game incredibly fun, and you look so awesome holding your sword out ready for an attack. But we've also added Frost buildup to this weapon. With adding Frost to the weapon, you are still going to get a B in Dexterity, so you're still going to be pumping out a lot of damage, and you're going to get that awesome Frost debuff on your enemy, allowing them to take 20% more damage. Now, the main way you want to play with this weapon, or at least how I have had the most success playing with it, is you want to chain together light and heavy attacks. It works really well with this weapon because they flow back and forth incredibly well, and you're going to put the most damage out that way. If you continually try to use Wing Stance once you're within a fight, it does get very, very difficult, and it really allows you to take a lot more damage than if you were just to go back and forth between light and heavy attacks. Now, with that being said, the skill gap for this stance is really fun, and if you get good enough with it, you can use light, heavy attacks, put your Wing Stance out, and then smash a light attack doing a flurry of attacks, and it is really fun and does a ton of damage. Now, we have a few different talismans we're going to be using for this build, and one of the setups is going to be for bosses, and the other setup is just going to be for running through the Lands Between and the DLC. Now, for this build, we're using the Cold Milady at plus 25. We are also using whatever armor set you would like to give you over 51 poise. For my boss encounters, I am using the Shard of Alexander, the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman, the Milson's Prosthesis, and the Rottenwing Sword Insignia. when you're just running through the lands between killing mobs and enemies, I would replace the Rottenwing Sword insignia with the Crusade insignia, allowing you to get an extra attack power boost each time you kill an enemy. You can also use Rellana's cameo as well if you find yourself holding stances for a little bit longer. Now for my Flask of Wonders physic, when I'm fighting bosses, I use the Thorny Crack tier as well as the Opaline Hard tier just to boost that damage negation a little bit. And then when I'm just fighting random enemies, I use the Thorny Crack tier and the Stone Barb Crack tier. And lastly, for my buffs, I am using Flame Grant Me Strength and Golden Vow with this setup, and you can see the stats right here on the side. And guys, there you have it. That is going to be 5 fun and really powerful builds that you can use in the DLC and in the vanilla game. They are a ton of fun to use, they do a lot of damage, and they're very user-friendly. So, with that being said, let me know some builds you guys use down in the comments. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in the next video. Make sure to subscribe on your way out, and until next time, stay safe, enjoy the game, and I'll see you in the next one.